Welcome to lesson 18. Here we will show how you create a new plugin spot. So we are going to show how not only can you create an algorithm implementation, but you can even create a new spot for a new algorithm type, and we will see how that works as part of the validation of the user setup process. If I go to my app, I'm going to fill in a user setup process, and I'm going to fill in some random data, and if I click on save it over here, it says names not valid, length minimum 4 characters needed. So in this particular case in this particular case we see that there is some validation which has kicked in, and it's saying that the length of the name has to be at least 4 characters. Where does this validation come from? Well, it comes from the validation algorithm on the business object, but it's using something on the user setup process type. On the user setup process type, we've added a name validation rule, and the algorithm that it's pointing to an algorithm which it's kicking in and running. If we actually go to this algorithm type, you'll see that this is of a type user setup process type name validation. This is definitely not base. This is one I added myself. It's a custom algorithm entity, and I created a new plugin spot for this. And I'm going to now go to the code and show you how that is done. The first thing to understand though is, where does this drop down user setup process type come from itself? So the answer to that question is, this is a lookup, and the lookup is the algorithm entity flag, and I have added in a cuscm field value CMUS, and that is the name that you see over here in the drop down. Equally important though is the Java value name, and this Java value name is going to be our connection to the code. So when I now open up the code, I'm going to show you the algorithm spot and how you create a new one. Here we have one placed in the admin directory, in the package, in the admin package config tools, and you see that we have an annotation algorithm spot, and has algorithm entity value, and this value over here will have to correspond to the value that I've placed into the field value, and that's the connection between the two. What I do is create an interface, extends a framework class, and I place the methods that I want this particular algorithm spot to have. So in this case, I'm going to have 4 methods: setting, first name, last name, and username, and those will be the inputs to my plugin. A new algorithm type of this, for this spot, will have inputs for the first name, last name, and username. They're expected to be filled, and then at the end it will spit out the get is name value. That's the output that needs to be set. So in this case, the concept will be that this algorithm spot will take the first name, last name, username, and do whatever it needs to do within the algorithm type, and then decide whether the name is valid or not. And then you imagine that whoever is calling this spot will make a decision when it's valid to do something as a result. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you now an example of an implementation, and our implementation of this algorithm spot. And we have one of those, and that is the if I can find it, it's called simple name. This is an example where I've just created a simple name validation, and it's using our new algorithm spot, and it's simply in the invoke testing to see. First of all, we have the standard, the overridden methods, taking in the first name, last name, and username, and then testing it and making sure it's no greater than 4, and then setting is name valid to no. So that is an example implementation. It's the example algorithm type that we're actually using in order to for this new plugin spot. Finally, though, this algorithm spot needs to be actually used and called in some way. If you create a new plugin spot, you also need to decide where this plugin spot will be called from. It isn't sufficient simply to put it, in our case, on the admin, on the user setup process type, who's going to use it. And that's where the validation program needs to call this algorithm spot. So if I go back to our validation program, which we saw a few lessons ago, you will see that I actually skipped the last one, check name validation algorithm. And that is the place where the plugin spot is being called. And what we have here is instantiating the plugin spot. First of all, we're going to call the use the BO instance to get the BO dispatcher to get the BO type, and we're going to then get the algorithm value, and then once we have the algorithm, we can call the algorithm spot by setting the inputs first name, last name, username, invoking it. It does whatever it needs to do, and then in this case, if it errors, it spits back an error. I would say that this isn't the best type of implementation here. I would imagine that the error message should actually be perhaps part of the algorithm itself. And it shouldn't be specific, so that you can actually, this validation program can actually run any different type of algorithms, and doesn't need to have the message specifically for this particular algorithm. So it's not a perfect example here, but you see the concept that you have a validation program calling the plugin spot. And why would you actually do this? Why would it be actually a useful idea to separate the code into two programs in the end? You have a validation which actually then calls another algorithm. Well, if you have different, again, it depends who is doing the division of labor and who is responsible for what. And if you want to create a more generic validation algorithm, BO validation, which then can call other types depending on the type, and don't want to always continuously open up the BO validation algorithm, this is a way to do that by separating that out into a separate algorithm by using a new algorithm spot. So there are times when, again, you could have, in this particular example, coded directly for the BO validation to check the type, and depending on different type, did different things. However, again, that would call for you continuously have to deal with this particular algorithm, as opposed to separating into a separate space where you can create your different algorithm types for a new spot, just testing the name. So there are reasons that you would actually want to have a new plugin spot. Again, the main thing to notice here is that a plugin spot is ultimately just a new interface. A new interface, relatively simply define your interface, your methods, and once you've done, and once you actually matched up your entity value here to the lookup, it will be available for you within the application to create new algorithm types. And then you have to decide, though, another thing you have to do when you introduce a new algorithm type is then decide how is that going to be used. Where within the application is it going to be called? And I have decided in this example that it's the BO validation that will be calling that, and that's one example. Obviously, once you actually have that done, once you have coded that, you then have not only the interface for Java you see over here, but config tools is also able then to use this new plugin spot, so you can code new algorithm types in script based upon the new spot that you created in Java.